This is the ruins of the lodge at the historic Haven Hill Estate in White Lake, Michigan. I'm Darren, and this is the Industrial Revolution channel. But you might notice this doesn't really look like Industrial Revolution. Well, stick with me a minute. I'm releasing this video, re-releasing this video really, by special request from a number of people. Rediscovering Edsel Ford's Haven Hill was my first archaeological documentary, my first and so far only feature-length archaeological documentary. Edsel Ford, if you're one of my regular viewers coming into this and don't know, Edsel Ford was Henry Ford's son. Henry Ford, you do know, because I've been to Henry Ford Museum with quite a few videos in Greenfield Village, also out to the village industry sites. Henry, after building the Rouge plant, which was the world's largest factory at the time, he kind of longed for the simpler times, the easier days. And as part of that, he kind of turned over the day-to-day operations of Ford Motor Company to his son Edsel, and he started collecting and eventually exhibiting. And that led to the creation of Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village, which is one of North America's best collections of, among other things, Industrial Revolution era technology. He also began building what he called his village industry sites. Long story behind these, I'll do a separate video on those someday. But the village industry sites were taking old grist mills mostly, water-powered grist mills, and converting them to water-powered auto parts factories. So, that's how it's tied in. If you're here to see Industrial Revolution technology, you will find it. In the secret underground spaces here on the estate, there is definitely some Industrial Revolution era technology. If you enjoyed my exploration videos, the Tinkers Creek Dam video, for example, you're going to like this one too. There's everything out here. I found fountains, old cars, even an open grave. So there's plenty to see here. I will also say that I made this a number of years ago. This video was produced quite a few years ago, and since then, the Friends of Highland Recreation Area, in conjunction with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, have been putting a lot of effort into restoring some of these buildings. I'm at the lodge site now, and although there hasn't been much done here from what the video shows, there are discussions underway on restoring all the stonework here, potentially later this year. The gatehouse has been restored. That's probably going to open up later this year as a park visitor center. Carriage house, the sheep barn, restoration works underway there as well. Thanks to, as I said, the huge efforts by the Friends of Highland Recreation Area, working with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. So this video was originally released only on DVD, had 3 DVD extras on it. It can be a little hard to find today. So I'm releasing it here on YouTube. The 3 extra DVD features, Nature Always Wins, A Special Place, and The Future, are at the end of the video. So stick around after the credits and be sure to watch that. And if you have any questions, comments, as always, leave me in the description. And Friday, we'll be back to our regular Industrial Revolution content. And now enjoy the show. Welcome to Haven Hill. I'm Darren Fowler with Exploration Guides. In 1923, Edsel Ford began to quietly buy up property here, about 45 miles northwest of downtown Detroit. In the end, he'd owned nearly 4 square miles of farmland, forest, and wetlands in what would become his Haven Hill estate. We're in front of the gatehouse, the first thing visitors to Haven Hill would see upon their arrival.
Now Henry Jones and a pretty little queen took a ride one day in a big limousine. The car kicked up and the engine wouldn't crank. There wasn't any gas in the gasoline tank. About that time along came Nord, and he rambled right along in his little old Ford, and he stole that queen as his engine sang the song. This little old Ford just rambled right along, and his little old Ford it rambled right along, and the little old Ford it rambled right along. The gas burned down in the big machine, but the darn little Ford don't need gasoline. The big limousine had to back downhill. The blame little Ford is going up still. When she blows out a tire, just wrap it up with wire, and the little Ford will ramble right along. Now they ran over glass and they ran.
The gatehouse was both the welcoming point for Haven Hill visitors and its first line of defense. Anyone wanting to enter the estate would have to pass through this narrow entry and convince the person on duty that they had legitimate business here. Consisting of two buildings, the shorter eastern building was a garage and work area, while the two-story western building was both residential house and guardhouse. After the state purchased the land, the park entrance was moved just to the west, where it still sits today, but the gatehouse continued to be used for ranger housing and office space up into the 1990s when it was abandoned to the elements. Both vandalism and the elements have taken their toll, leaving the building structurally unsound and in danger of collapse. Fortunately, local volunteers came to the rescue. They've already replaced the roof and some of the windows. They've removed asbestos and secured the structure from both the elements and further vandalism. The interior, though, still needs a lot of work. Years of water damage have left the floor on the first level with some bad spots, but that's nothing compared to the second floor, where there's really only a few good, safe places left to walk. The building also appears to have originally contained a small telephone switchboard providing phone service within the estate, as well as phone connections to the outside world. It's no big deal today, of course, but in 1923, having as many as 11 separate phone extensions spread across your estate was definitely high tech. There's clearly a lot of work left to do here, but remodeling is nothing new to Haven Hill. In fact, the gatehouse has actually been remodeled at least a couple of times already. One of the easiest places to see this is the fireplace. Here we see the most recent incarnation of the fireplace, set in the brick chimney. But as we move up, we see an arch of bricks from a previous, larger fireplace opening.
Hey, you know what? Let's sneak it in here.
Yeah, cover the hours for that extra work, because it was like 2 days or 2 guys. Yeah.
And here, located just above the garage door, is one of the only places that we think hasn't been remodeled in the entire gatehouse, at least since the state purchased it. This is believed to be the original paint from when the Ford family owned Haven Hill.
Trying to reduplicate the extension. This definitely looks original here.
There's lots more to explore here, so let's continue on through the gatehouse and head into the estate. As you leave the gatehouse, driving through the woods, the next thing you'll see will be Haven Hill Lake on your right. Haven Hill Lake is an artificial lake built for the Ford family. It occupies about 69 acres and is fed by a combination of a small stream called Cedar Creek in the northeast corner of the lake and countless springs under and adjacent to the lake itself.
So this is where they say there's an eagle nest out here?
Way over in the back to the due west of us. Back in the marsh over there at the
Haven Hill Lake isn't the only man-made body of water at Haven Hill, of course. Far from it, in fact. It is, however, by far the largest man-made body of water, and the second largest lake of any kind on the estate after Keeple Lake.
On this little lake that there's nothing in it but thousands of those little pumpkin seeds.
It's a shallow lake, built mostly on wetland, and held back by Haven Hill Dam. The most visible feature of the Haven Hill Lake Dam, of course, is the main spillway, at about 4.5 feet high and 23 feet wide. On either side of the spillway are concrete towers, each holding one of the large diversion pipes used to divert the water flow during construction. Once construction was completed, valves in these two towers were closed forever. You can still see the large, now unused outlet pipes in the laid fieldstone walls to either side of the dam. Haven Hill Lake Dam is constructed of reinforced concrete. Being almost 100 years old, with little or no maintenance during that time, it's beginning to show its age, but it's still quite solid. On either side of the spillway, the towers rise an additional 1.5 feet above the surface of the lake, flush with the concrete-lined earthen dams which stretch about 100 feet in either direction. These side pieces of the dam are made of a 2.5-foot thick piece of concrete backed by plenty of dirt. Today, in addition to holding back Haven Hill Lake, the dam is a popular fishing site, and one of the more popular hiking trails in the park crosses over the dam via a wooden footbridge. Before we leave the dam, it's worth noting that Haven Hill Lake started life as a very shallow lake, and like most man-made lakes, it's getting even more shallow. Silting and eutrophication are slowly filling in the lake. Originally, the drop of the dam was about 4.5 feet. Today, after nearly 100 years, it's down to about 1/4 of that. In a few more decades, nature may fully reclaim the lake. Anyone who's ever visited Haven Hill Lake probably thinks that the Haven Hill Dam was the only construction needed to actually build the lake. And I admit I used to think the same thing too. But then as I was walking down this trail one day, there was this big block of concrete sitting beside the trail. The ground on the right side of the trail is a couple feet lower than the water on the left. Also, the trail is very, very straight and even here. Suspiciously so, really. A bit of probing showed that that one little concrete block actually extended for at least 320 feet along the lakeshore. While the main dam was left visible for everyone to see, this part was built, then immediately buried in dirt and rocks, and planted to look like a natural part of the lakeshore. As we leave Haven Hill Lake, there's one more feature worth noting. One of the original roads of the Haven Hill estate crossed Cedar Creek just below Haven Hill Dam. The original road was narrow, far too narrow for today's traffic, and is no longer in use by motor vehicles. Only foot traffic crosses the bridge today, and from the top there's nothing to indicate that it was ever anything else, other than the massively built-up trail that you're walking on. If you step off the trail, though, you can see something just a bit peculiar about this bridge. The culvert isn't even close to being round anymore. This bridge has had some serious loads on it in the past. You probably can't tell it, but this is a racetrack. Or at least it was until about 70 years ago. You see, Edsel owned racehorses, and he kept them here at Haven Hill. On the east shore of Haven Hill Lake, at the south end of what is now the Goose Meadows picnic area, was an oval racetrack for training his horses. They lived just south of here, just across the original Haven Hill Road, in what was then called the Farm Group. These two buildings are all that's left of the original farm group today. In fact, the building here on my right is the only building in the entire Haven Hill estate which has actually been in continuous use since it was first built in the 1920s. Although damaged by fire and partially rebuilt, this original farm group building is, today, the park maintenance building. The residential building here at the farm group, which has also been damaged by fire a couple times, was lived in continuously until about a decade ago when the park's chief ranger moved out. Beyond the maintenance building was the stables, where Edsel kept his racehorses. There was also a chicken coop here, as chickens were raised for both their eggs and their meat. And finally, extensive vegetable and flower gardens were tucked into every available space at the farm group. Along with the chicken coop, and later the sheep barn, the vegetable garden allowed the Haven Hill estate to be largely self-sufficient. Edsel Ford was never much of a farmer, but his father Henry was. Henry left the family farm as a teenager to spend his life in industry, but by the 1920s, as Edsel was building Haven Hill, Henry was returning to his roots, having developed the belief that farming could bring about health benefits, purifying both the body and the spirit. The largest structure at Haven Hill, Edsel built a sheep barn at the south end of the estate. Originally, it housed a large herd of 1,500 sheep, but after serious disease swept through the flock a couple times, he diversified into Angus cattle and pigs as well, while still keeping a smaller number of sheep on site. After the state purchased Haven Hill, the livestock were moved out, but the barn remained in use. In addition to warehouse use by the DNR, the state parks operated their sign shop here until around 1980, when the building was abandoned. Years of neglect took its toll. On June 8, 2008, a severe storm swept through Haven Hill. The sheep barn, already weakened by decay, large holes in the roof, and with most of the windows broken out, just couldn't withstand it.
A few little holes in the roof here and there. What time is it anyway?
We lost about 3/4 of the sheep barn in that storm, the entire livestock area, in fact.
Yeah, we could be done down here before the noon thing.
The front quarter of the sheep barn, which originally housed the work and storage areas for the livestock operation, as well as the estate's private fire engine, plus the sign shop's vacuum system at the far back end of the barn, is all that survived. But it wasn't over yet.
The hardware that was salvaged.
See, I might be able to get a picture online if you look at clay.
if you want to change direction, if you want to change rotary motion from one direction to another, you still use worm gears.
Yep.
The remaining structure was in imminent danger of collapse, with rotted beams and rafters and a strong lean to the east. It didn't look good, and I didn't think it would make it. Fortunately, volunteers came to the rescue with emergency stabilization. While cleaning up debris from the collapsed area, salvaging what they could, they managed to raise enough funds to bring in a team of professional barnwrights to repair the damaged structure. There's still a lot of work left to do, but things are looking good. We've lost a lot here, but the sheep barn has also become one of Haven Hill's success stories.
Like the extra version of
Located
going on
almost
the
at the
opposite
top
side
of
of a
Haven
tree.
Hill, this is the carriage house. Of all the original forge structures, the carriage house is by far the best preserved. But that's not to say that it hasn't changed over the years, of course. Originally designed as a carriage house, what we'd call a garage today, the large central part of the building was completely open, with 3 large double doors on the east side. The Fords soon remodeled the carriage house. They completely remodeled the interior, closed off the doors, and left their cars out in the cold. We're in the former garage area now. As you can see, it's no longer the big, open space it once was. You see, Haven Hill wasn't just popular with Edsel and Eleanor, it was also popular with their friends, many of whom wanted to spend the night. Unfortunately, the lodge just didn't have a lot of extra bedrooms, so they remodeled here instead, adding lots of extra guest space. As part of that remodeling, they also added a new floor, completely covering over the old one. One of the many legends of Haven Hill is that the original floor of the garage was actually made out of brick. That makes sense, but they obviously had to cover it up for the bedrooms, since brick makes a rotten bedroom floor, especially in the winter. When we went to verify the legend, we expected to find bricks. We found a hole just big enough to tuck a small camera into, and this is what we found. Nothing but a plain concrete floor. No bricks here, I'm afraid, but there's still more to see inside. We did find bricks in this room, though, laid in a beautiful herringbone pattern.
It's definitely an area light, which is good. That means you don't have the spot this has.
This is the north room of the carriage house, and today, other than some wear and tear, it looks pretty much like it did when it was first built.
At the other end of the carriage house, we have the original quarters for the armed resident chauffeur. He had plenty of space here, with a large bedroom and private bath. The furnishings here aren't original, of course. Most of the original furniture of the estate was removed, and the state replaced it as needed. There's a second floor to the carriage house now, above the old garage area. Originally, the garage area was open all the way up to the roof, but when the bedrooms were put in downstairs, they added a large open area on the second floor. Although it's not documented anywhere, it's widely believed that this area was mostly used as a safe, indoor play space for the kids. When they put in the second floor, they also added the small windows at each end, but the structural work didn't end there. See how the central section of the roof is raised up in a way that doesn't look quite original? That's because it's not. For years, it was thought that this was done by the state when they ran the conference center here. Until recently, there was a set of rusting metal fire stairs up to the second floor. We knew that the state added these stairs when they set up the conference center, which is why people thought they also changed the roof line. Looking at the bottom of the roofing from the inside, you can tell that the raised part of the roof was definitely not done at the same time as the rest of it. You can tell that by looking at the spacing of the slats. You can see the large gaps between the slats on the original roof on the left side, and yet there's no space at all between them on the right side. Both methods were actually considered to be completely acceptable, but it's unlikely that a single roofer working on a single roof all at one time would have done almost all of the horizontal slats with spacing between them, and then in just one little section have left no space between them at all. Looking at the door, though, is what really tells us that the state added the door and the stairs, but didn't alter the roof line. You can see where the original structure, and even the original windowsill, was cut through to fit the fire door. Had the door been here originally, rather than having been retrofit later, you'd expect the work to have been cleaner. You'd also expect the wood used in the construction to have been the same. This leads us to believe that the roof was actually raised by the Ford family. They let them add a large window to the second floor, letting in more natural light. When the state later reused the building, they needed a fire exit from the second floor. They replaced the large window with a narrower window and added a doorway, plus the now removed stairway. The carriage house is actually the best place to see the construction that was used both here and up at the top of the hill at the lodge itself. Here we have the Vermont flagstone porch, the same Vermont flagstone that was used in the fireplaces, at the veranda, up at the top of the hill in the lodge, as well as for the pool deck. And here we have the cedar trees that make up these log cabins, except these aren't really log cabins. Let me tell you about the cedar trees. They were cut from Ford Motor Company property in the Upper Peninsula, brought down on Ford Motor Company freighters to the River Rouge plant. Then they were trucked up here to the site. There was a sawmill set up, and the trees were then cut in half lengthwise. They were then attached to the structural walls. So where it's normal log cabins, the logs themselves make up the structural walls. In this case, these logs are only cosmetic. Looking at the back of the carriage house, where the state cut in the doorway, it's easy to see the original construction, showing the original planking of the traditional building and the large, heavy half logs nailed over the top of them. Note the wire wrapped around the nails. It was used to hold the bark in place. Without that wire, the bark would have all been long gone. We'll leave the carriage house now and make the short trip up to the lodge on top of the hill. Unfortunately, it's not in quite as good of shape. On the night of Thursday, January 21st, 1999, 3 local teens broke into Haven Hill Lodge. They weren't the first to do this, of course. The state boarded up the lodge and pretty much abandoned it in 1980, and people have been breaking into it ever since. It was a cold night that night, sort of like it is out here tonight. and they lit a fire inside the lodge. Unfortunately, the fire got out of control. By the time the fire department was able to respond, by the time they got through 2 locked gates, up the tight, twisty hill up here to the top of Haven Hill, the fire was completely out of control. We lost Haven Hill Lodge that night. Here's what's left. Welcome to the lodge. I'm standing in the front door. Originally the lodge would have been covered in the same half-cedar logs as we saw over at the carriage house, the same cedar shake roof. Come on inside, I'll show you around. We'll cut through the foyer here on the way over to the living room. This is the living room of the lodge. There would have originally been windows on both sides, all the way along both walls, and of course the huge Vermont stone fireplace at the end. This would have been a really comfortable place for the Ford family to spend time and relax with their guests. But for the real talk of science, philosophy, and exploration, I think we need to step outside onto the veranda. It's not really that romantic of a notion thinking about talks of science, philosophy, and exploration happening here on this veranda when you consider who was here. It wasn't just Henry and Edsel Ford. It was also inventor Thomas Edison, aviator Charles Lindbergh, explorer Admiral Byrd, writer Edgar Rice Burroughs, and plenty of others. Just imagine the discussions that would have been held here. Let's step back inside and we'll continue the tour. Just inside here, we have the formal dining room. We're in the dining room right now, and just off to your right here is the kitchen. Behind the kitchen is the servants' quarters. There's a full-time live-in cook as well as a full-time live-in butler. If you follow me, we'll cut back to the foyer and I'll show you the rest of the lodge. Coming up on your right here, we have a large open courtyard area. The courtyard allowed plenty of light to come in through these windows along the side of the hallway, as well as natural light into the kitchen and the master suite. On this side, we have 2 bedrooms. If this were built today, we'd probably have bedrooms on this side as well, but the Fords obviously valued their natural lighting. As we approach the end of the hallway here, off to your left, there are 2 more bedrooms. And on your right, we have the master suite. The master suite had a separate bedroom, master bathroom, and a separate sitting room. And of course, directly ahead of you is the newly added sunroom. At about 6,900 square feet, the exterior of the lodge was built in much the same way as the carriage house, only much larger. The interior was furnished nicely, but it wasn't overly ostentatious. Underground, and now buried under the debris of the fire, was a 2-level basement housing all the infrastructure needed to run the lodge. After the fire, the remaining walls and all but one fireplace were collapsed into the basement, which was then topped off with dirt. There was a fear that both the foundation and the basement walls had been so weakened by the fire that they were at imminent risk of collapse. Whether they were or not, hopefully someday someone will undertake an excavation here to see what actually survived. The ruins of the lodge are surrounded in beauty, but it's hard to get away from reminders of the fire. Before we leave the lodge, I want to show you one of the secret tunnels. Local legend says there's miles and miles of secret underground tunnels here at Haven Hill, and I'm standing in one of them right now. This secret tunnel, complete with this ultra-secret, well-disguised hatch, is located all of about 50 feet away from the lodge, and it's really not very secret. This was used simply to lower equipment into the basement. A crane was set up through this hole over here, and they could raise and lower everything through the hole under the driveway and straight into the basement. It was the only way to get stuff in or out of storage, as there was really no good way to go down into the basement itself. We've seen where the Ford family lived. Now let's take a look at where they played. Leaving the lodge via the south veranda, we'll go down the west side of Haven Hill. Originally, there were stairs here, complete with several landings and electric lights. Today, unfortunately, the stairs are gone and the climb is steep, and if it's wet or icy, can get pretty treacherous too. There's a long climb back up the hill, of course, but there were benches on the landings in case you wanted to take a break. As we near the bottom of the hill, we'll turn left and arrive at the pool. The pool is almost directly below the carriage house, near the bottom of Haven Hill. The deck still has the original Vermont flagstones, although now with weeds and even small trees growing up in between them. This is the same Vermont stone that we saw at both the lodge and the carriage house. Originally, there was a small bathhouse at the far end, but that was torn down by the state around 1957, and today all that remains of it is the slightly raised concrete foundation. Before we jump into the pool, there's a couple more features that I want to show you on the deck. The tall back retaining wall, which follows the contour of the hillside, combines with the lower front retaining wall to create a 9-foot wide upper terrace for the pool deck. The back 5 feet of the terrace was itself slightly raised above the front section of the terrace. This would have given an uninterrupted view over the low railing that originally ran along the top of the lower wall. Sitting on this terrace, facing west across the pool, this would have been a great location for relaxing while watching the sunset. It's possible that it could even have served as a stage for musicians during a small pool party. At the bottom of the lower wall, up against the bathhouse, was a low buffet area. You can still see the remains of both electrical connections and a water supply on this platform. Onto the pool, and we see that it hasn't fared very well. The diving board at the far end was removed years ago for safety reasons, leaving just the concrete base, and has been partially filled in over the years with dirt and debris. Still, we can get a feel for what it once was. The bare concrete walls of the pool that you see today are a bit deceptive, really. All the way around the pool, you see these round marks. These would have once held fittings which held a brass rail running the full circumference of the pool, just below the water line, as was the style of elite pools of the era. Another curious feature in the pool is the 16 clamshell-shaped water jets, which are located only along the western side. These aren't just decorative. By spraying water from one side only, they'd have cleared the surface of the pool of any leaves or other debris that would naturally tend to drop into the water. But they had another purpose as well. The deck is on the east side of the pool, so you'd be looking west across it. In late afternoon, the sun would reflect unpleasantly on the still, mirror-like surface of the water. These water jets would break up that smooth surface, preventing those unpleasant reflections. Just below the pool is the tennis court. One of the main park trails, running along the west side of Haven Hill, actually crosses right over the top of it. But unless you know it's here, you'd probably never even notice it. If you do happen to notice anything, what you're most likely to notice is this odd line of stones in the ground, right at the top of a short, steep hill. This is actually the south edge of the tennis court.
Take the golf cart back up.
Across the tennis court, you can just barely make out where the hillside has been cut away for the northeast corner. If you're willing to step off the trail, there's one more thing to see. The stone wall juts out from the west side of the tennis court, right in the center of the court. This provided space for the line judge. Of course, the biggest feature of the tennis court is the imported French clay covering the court itself. This clay lies just below a thin layer of local dirt, which has washed over the surface over the years. If you scrape away a bit of the topsoil, you can still see the dark clay that Edsel and his family played on when they lived here. It was on my second trip to the park, and I was hiking here with a friend. I'd been to the top of the hill before, but never down at the bottom. We'd already found the cabins that day, and the bear tree too, and I knew that there was supposed to be a pool here, somewhere, just off the trail. I looked to the left and saw this. Okay, a fenced area, surrounding what looked like concrete walls. It had to be the pool, right? Nope, it wasn't the pool. Lost in the woods and forgotten for decades, the fountain sits north of the pool, almost directly below the lodge. Looking at it, you may be wondering why we call this a fountain. To understand that, we need to step inside. Trekking poles like this can actually be used for a lot of things other than just walking down the trail and scooting the occasional snake off the trail in front of you. They can really help out with your explorations. Here at the fountain, we used a trekking pole like this one to figure out what it was we were actually looking at. At first glance, this looks like a simple concrete-lined pool, and we might have stuck with that, except we did a little bit more looking. And what we found, using a trekking pole like this, except by tapping the floor, it sounds pretty solid. Tap again, still solid. And again, yep, still solid. And that's exactly what you'd expect, right? But as soon as you move 2 feet away, no longer solid concrete, it's hollow. It's like that all the way around the pool. You have a 2-foot ledge that's solid, and then a hollow space underneath for the reservoir. That alone was not enough for us. A little more probing, and we discovered actually that this is not a single piece of concrete I'm standing on. It's actually 4 separate pieces. Those 4 pieces are separated by a gap, and the gap was filled up with tar. The tar would allow for the expansion and contraction of the concrete, as well as some expansion and contraction of water underneath it if it happened to freeze. This is what the tar looks like. Most of it's still in the crack, but a few pieces have popped out over the years. It's very shiny when it's freshly broken. And there's even a little bit more information here that we were able to find. See that tree over there at the end, the bigger one? That one's not growing on top of this concrete slab. It's actually growing up through the concrete slab, through a hole that one of the fountain nozzles would have originally come through. There's another hole over here just like it, exactly the same distance from the end. And right in the very center, where the 4 concrete slabs meet up, there's a drain. The drain allowed the water to drain from the top down into the reservoir, where it's pumped back up through the 2 fountain nozzles. The nozzles are missing now, but we know this was once a fountain. In fact, it was a fountain that could be filled through a spigot over there. It's under the water line. And in the winter, you could open a drain valve, and it would drain to the swamp behind me. Before we leave the fountain, I want to take a look at one more feature just a bit closer. This is the fence that I mentioned earlier, which surrounds the fountain area. For lack of a better name, this is called Ford fence. We know that it surrounded places that were special to the Fords. The pool, the fountain, and just one other place. But we'll come to that later. We're not exactly sure what its purpose was, but it was probably just decorative. It's really not very functional. Pools and tennis courts are great for summer, but this is Michigan, and we have another season here called winter. We're following, as best we can tell, the route of the old toboggan run down the north side of Haven Hill. Starting off along a ridge line before diving into a small ravine, the Haven Hill toboggan run was nearly a quarter-mile long with a drop of about 155 feet. Just to add excitement, near the bottom of the hill, while going at top speed, we shot through the steel gate in what is now the only surviving piece of the original Haven Hill security fence. Once through the gate, you'd have a level runout area, then go up a braking hill to stop. We found the remains of benches at the bottom of the braking hill, and along the length of the run, the remains of 16 white painted wooden posts, which we assume would have once held lights. Remember that I said the toboggan run drops 155 feet, right? That means dragging the toboggan back up that same 155 feet. That's just too much work. Fortunately, dropped along the ravine, shortcutting a broad turn of the toboggan run, is an electrically powered lift. Today, the lift line is gone, but here we see the bottom pulley, which was solidly anchored into the ground. You'd hook your toboggan onto the lift line here, and it'd be pulled up for you, letting you skip the steepest part of the hill. And this is the top pulley, right at the top of the toboggan run. Originally, it had an electric motor attached to the drive system. Along the length of the lift, there were 3 7-foot-tall, hook-shaped supports for the downhill line. Today, only one of these remains standing. For those days when you didn't feel like tobogganing, Haven Hill also had ski slopes built on Teeple Hill at the far south end of the estate between the sheep barn and Teeple Lake. Today there's actually quite a few slopes cut into Teeple Hill, although we don't know how many of them are actually original. After the state purchased the property, management of the ski area was taken over by a local cooperative which was set up for just that purpose. They expanded the area somewhat, and eventually they operated 3 rope tows and around a dozen or so different slopes. One thing we can tell about the ski hills on Teeple Hill, though, is that they were here for quite a while. In fact, they were here so long that they went through at least 3 different lighting systems. These white lights are likely the oldest and may date back to the original Ford ski slopes. Somewhat newer, these more conventional street lights are the second generation, followed by these more modern black lights. Today, there is no longer downhill skiing on Teeple Hill, although cross-country skiing remains popular here and everywhere in the park. Edsel Ford, so the story goes, would finish work, drive himself home, put on his pack, lace up his boots, and hit the trail. And these are the trails that Edsel Ford would hit. We're in what we call the Edsel Ford Historic Nature Area. This area, west of Haven Hill itself, is composed of woods and wetlands, streams and ponds, trails and bridges. It was designed by world-famous landscape architect Jens Jensen. Jensen in this area, unlike his other areas, which were more formal gardens, really just enhanced nature. He created low dams to divert water into ponds and streams, recontoured the land for better trails, and, in the case of where we are today, he built this, which we call the plateau. There's plenty of small plateaus here at Haven Hill with traces of old trails going to them, and it's clear that the Ford family liked their views. This one, though, is on a different scale. Carved from a hillside, the plateau is an oval area, about 100 feet long and more than 30 feet wide at its widest point. It's 15 feet down from the current hilltop, though the original hilltop was probably higher and was removed to build the plateau itself. It's estimated that at least 500 tons of earth were moved to excavate the plateau, making it the biggest undertaking in the historic nature area. It would have been a great place to entertain, or just to watch the sunset. It's always tough to find, and it's nearly impossible to find during some times of the year, but if you're lucky enough to be hiking the far western trail in the winter, you can probably just spot it off to your east, not too far from the old road. But this isn't the only thing to see in this area. This is one of the many ponds created or enhanced by Jens Jensen. Due to a lack of maintenance, both of the water channels and the low diversion dams, many of them are now dry much of the year. But originally it would have been full of water and maybe even stocked with fish. You can see the stone lining along the side, and a bit of a mystery here too. How did this car get here? There are at least a couple miles of trail here in the historic nature area, and some of the trails do lead here, but none of the roads. Was this here while the Fords were here? Was it some kind of landscaping? Maybe a reference to Ford's automotive work? We'll probably never know. With all the ponds and streams in the Edsel Ford Historic Nature Area, we obviously had to have some bridges. We found the remains of 4. We're at what's called the Dry Bridge. The Dry Bridge, unlike other bridges in the area, it's called the Dry Bridge because there's really nothing under it. Once upon a time, we assumed that water flowed through here. Changing water levels have left this bridge dry, and fortunately for us, very well preserved. Here we can get a really good look at how this bridge was built. Starting with 3 large 24-foot long logs, we nailed planks across all of them to make the bridge deck. As you can see, these aren't in very good shape. When the state purchased the land, they replaced much of the bridge deck with these new boards. The next bridge, which we call the Moss Bridge, is just beyond the Dry Bridge, and, like the Dry Bridge, was used for a time by the state park. The deck was replaced, and as this bridge was twice as long, at 48 feet instead of 24, and it crossed deeper water, a handrail made of branches was added. Unlike the Dry Bridge, the water level at the Moss Bridge has actually gone up some, or maybe the bridge has sunk into the mud. Having spent so much time underwater, the wood is decayed and is now very soft and spongy and is definitely not safe to cross. This is the Nail Bridge, and it was originally the identical twin of the Moss Bridge. It had the same construction and the same 48-foot length, but unlike the Moss Bridge, the Nail Bridge wasn't used by the state, so it was never repaired with the new deck boards. As you can see, the deck boards are almost completely rotted away. It's actually kind of hard to recognize the Nail Bridge as even being a bridge at all. With the deck boards gone, the 3 main support logs have all shifted together and sunk into the mud, and the northern log is usually completely underwater. The only thing that really gives it away is the hundreds of nails along the length of each log. Like the Moss Bridge, the Nail Bridge is definitely not safe to cross. To get to our final bridge, we need to get to the other side, but we'll take the much safer route around the end of the pond and back up past the Dry Bridge. Just across a small island from the Nail Bridge, around the corner from the Dry Bridge, is the 4th and final bridge in the Edsel Ford Historic Nature Area. This one was actually pretty challenging to figure out. So you think about it, the other 3 bridges were all pretty simple. They all looked like bridges. They had a standard bridge deck. They had 3 main posts supporting the bridge deck, and that was it. A handrail on a couple of the newer ones. But this one is different. So at first we thought, okay, the bridge deck sat on top of these posts and ran across here, but that didn't make any sense. There just isn't enough wood down here for that. So then we realized eventually that I'm actually standing on the bridge deck. The water has always been very shallow here. It's almost completely gone most of the time here today. So I'm standing on the bridge deck, which ran across here, and on top of these 4 posts, there would have originally been a bench. And the bench, a lot of people sit on here, and you could sit here and face this way or face that way. And you'd overlook the water here, shallow flow underneath. There were fish in here originally, so they probably would have been able to fish off both sides. And it's a really nice, quiet place down here to spend some time and relax. And it all made sense then, except for these. And what were these posts, these vertical posts? And at first we thought obviously it'd be a roof over the benches, but there's just not enough wood here for this to be a roof. And then we also noticed that on both ends we have 5 metal stakes. Those 5 stakes on each end, combined with these 2 posts, would have supported the roof, but it wasn't a wooden roof. Here they actually used a canvas roof. That roof actually provided shelter from rain and from sun here, allowed the members of the Ford family to sit on the bench and relax. And we know that some of them spent quite a bit of time here. And the way we know that is that if you look at the sides of these posts, as people were sitting up here, swinging their legs back and forth, talking, fishing, whatever, occasionally their boots would rub against the side of these posts. And that wore away the wood. And all 4 of these posts have quite a bit of wear on them. So you can tell that somebody spent a lot of time down here. At some point in the past, somebody came up to the top of this hill. They dug holes in the ground, filled them with concrete. Once the concrete was in, they stood these big rocks upright in the concrete, and then they just left them. We don't know why. There's at least 5 of these big ones on top of the hill. A number of them have been rolled down the hillside. We've also found at least 3 where the concrete was poured and small rocks were packed into the top. There's no pattern to it that we've been able to determine. They don't form a flat base, so you couldn't have built anything on them. This is just one of the mysteries at Haven Hill. There actually is some basis for the legends about secret underground tunnels located here at Haven Hill. In fact, it seems that almost anywhere you go here at Haven Hill, you'll find signs of things hidden beneath your feet, but they're usually not very exciting. Let's go shoot down that drain again with better lighting, because I could... Sometimes, though, they really do look intriguing. And sometimes there's just no hiding the fact that there's something really big here. Really though, there's no mystery. Edsel spent his days at work focusing on the details of how things work. When he got home, that's the last thing he wanted to see. Taking inspiration from longtime family friend Thomas Edison, he insisted that all the infrastructure at Haven Hill be hidden. So it was all buried, mostly in 3 pairs of underground chambers. This one's actually pretty easy to get into, so let's go ahead and take a look inside. We're in the smallest of the 3 underground chambers now, located near the sheep barn. There's really not much here. Never was, really. The electrical service has mostly been stripped, but we still have pieces of the water system in place. The original well pump is pulled out and boarded over, with the newer state-installed well next to it. The large, pressurized tank built into the wall held water, under pressure, for the sheep barn, both originally and later for the DNR sign shop. We're in the pump house and pool equipment room, located near the bottom of Haven Hill. Here you see both the pool filters and the water softener used for the pool. Filling up the pool obviously used quite a bit of water, but that's okay. They had plenty of water here. At first, this looks like a steam engine sitting on end, but it's not. This is actually a well pump for Haven Hill. This is a Gould 971 pump. It's originally designed for small towns and is capable of 67 gallons per minute of water. By comparison, today's home pumps usually pump less than 10 gallons a minute. Originally, this pump would have been steam-driven, and where you see this electric motor would have been 2 large pulleys, which you would have connected to a steam motor. They don't sell this model anymore, but fortunately, Gould still had a copy of their catalog. The pump ran fairly slowly, really, only about 25 to 30 strokes per minute. There's a lot of special things here at Haven Hill, but of all of them, this pump is my favorite artifact. There's still more to see underground though, so let's head up to the top of the hill.
Oh, that's right, Yosh.
Right now we're in the tank room. This large underground chamber is located at the top of Haven Hill near the carriage house. Behind me, you see the 2 large glass-lined steel tanks. These tanks were filled with water and pressurized with air from this air compressor in front of me. That provided a good, steady water service to everyone on top of the hill, to the lodge and the carriage house, as well as the landscaping up here on top of the hill. To give you an idea of the size of these tanks, 9,000 gallons is about the size of a routine tanker truck driving down the highway. And we have 2 of them here. If you were to dump both of these tanks into the swimming pool at the bottom of the hill, you'd overflow it. They had a lot of water up here. These tanks are massive. Of course, if the power went out, they still wanted water, so they brought this Model T engine to Haven Hill.
This works.
They hooked up the Model T engine to this generator, which could then power the air compressor during the power outage.
Yep.
So they had water, but they still had no electricity. That's where this Kohler electric generator comes in. It'd provide all the electricity needed here at the top of the hill. The state didn't want to maintain this system, and they had 30 years newer technology to work with, so they appear to have installed this much smaller system. A smaller room, located beside the tank room, has the equally massive switching equipment for the electrical supply here on top of the hill. It's a huge room with impressive equipment that, hopefully, someday will be open to the public. So about those legends, there's miles and miles of secret underground tunnels here at Haven Hill. They don't exist. They showed you a tunnel up at the lodge, but it wasn't very secret, and it was only about 50 feet long. That tunnel was used to move stuff in and out of the basement. The legend says you can get to them from the basement of the lodge. But this is all that's left of the basement, located under the south veranda. This survived only because it wasn't part of the original structure. But even here, at the far back end, the ladder just goes down into the dirt. So is there any actual evidence of another underground tunnel here at Haven Hill? Well, I've crawled under every building. I've opened every manhole cover I could find. I've been in every underground space on the entire estate. And I can tell you definitively that yes, there is evidence of one more tunnel. One end of it's right here. Here's the carriage house. If you go through the door, across the hall, there's a restroom just on the other side. It looks like it's sort of the wrong size, wrong shape. It just doesn't feel quite right. But it's when you go into the crawl space underneath here, that's where things really get interesting. There's a crawl space under the south end of the carriage house. This is where the chauffeur's bedroom was located. But what's up with these concrete walls? They're not load-bearing. Let's take a look inside.
Yeah, but there's a lot of rumors about the place, though, is the thing.
It's pretty tight in this hole, and I can't really see where I'm putting my hand, so I'm just hoping there's nothing in there that bites.
No fair. Okay, this makes no sense.
The original floor joist
Unless
didn't
that's
cross
water.
this room, and the floorboards in this room are different too.
If this is filled with water,
The strangest
this makes
thing, though,
sense.
while the rest of the crawl space is just
No,
dirt,
there's some odd
this
reflections,
large
sort of.
concrete walled space is actually filled with concrete. Why?
Yeah, I'm good. Can you get around the far back end and go 3 boards back and tell me if you see my light shining out the back?
No. It's mortar.
Really?
I am correct.
Right, but
As best we can tell, you'd enter the tunnel by going into the carriage house and down through that concrete shaft that we saw from the crawl space. Once you were down at the bottom, about 15 feet down, you'd be in a reinforced concrete tunnel, which you could then take up to the lodge. You had to be that deep in order to get below all the water and sewer lines that leave the carriage house and also the lodge at the top of the hill. The only place the tunnel could have gone from here was up to the lodge. This is the best guess of the route it followed, although there are some other options. The tunnel would have allowed members of the Ford family and their guests to go from the carriage house here up to the top of the hill at the lodge without having to go outside. And remember, there would have been quite a bit of foot traffic between the two. Originally this was used as a garage, but within a few years it was converted into guest bedroom space. So going outside in not necessarily great weather wasn't exactly something that you always wanted to do. Once the state bought the property, within a few years they converted this to a conference center. There were a lot more people who would be spending the night here, and the state really didn't want people going down into the tunnels. They filled in the tunnel, capped it with concrete, extended floor joists over it, put new floorboards on top, and built a restroom on top of that. No one's going into that tunnel again. As for the other end, that was likely sealed up just as well by the state. Today, of course, it's sealed even better. On March 1st, 1932, the son of Charles Lindbergh was kidnapped. Despite paying the $50,000 in ransom, the boy was killed and his body found on May 12th. This understandably had a big impact on Edsel and Eleanor, as their 4 children lived here in remote, isolated Haven Hill. As a result, the Fords built this security fence. The fence originally enclosed the family area of Haven Hill, including the pool, the tennis courts, the lodge, the carriage house, the nature area, the toboggan run. And it was patrolled day and night by armed security with dogs. An outer security perimeter was also set up, which was patrolled on horseback. After the state purchased the land, most of the security fence was torn down. Some of it was reused here at the sheep barn to secure the outside work and storage areas during the time that the barn was used as a warehouse and work area by the state. Most of it, though, is laying in piles scattered around the woods. Only about 250 feet actually remain standing at the original location at the bottom of the toboggan run. This section, with a gate that could be opened to let the toboggans through, is the only place on the estate that we've actually found the name of Edsel Ford. There's plenty more to discover here at Haven Hill, just waiting for someone to find it. We initially nicknamed this enclosure the Zoo. One theory was that it housed pigs, which Edsel brought to Haven Hill to kill rattlesnakes, which were actually common here when he purchased the property. It's just north of the lodge, partway down the hill, and most likely housed at least some of the estate's guard dogs. Unfortunately, in the 5 years or so since I first saw it, the dog houses have been completely flattened, apparently due to a combination of decay and falling branches. Some things are more mysterious, like these short fence posts located east of the lodge, partway down the hill. They're the same posts used for the decorative Ford fence, which surrounds both the pool and fountain, but here they don't actually appear to surround anything. All we can find is a single line of posts crossing over what appears to be an artificial rock dam. What was here originally? There's plenty of other unexpected things to run across on the estate. This hand pump, for example, is located west of the sheep barn, not far off the trail. No longer functional, it was probably used to provide water for livestock. Ford family wasn't the first to live in this area, of course. Plenty of others had lived and died here before them.
Now this is a basement. Look
There
at
were
the
farmers
dressed
living here
walls.
when Edsel purchased what would become the Haven Hill estate. The buildings were torn down, often leaving little or no trace. Here, an especially well-built basement remained.
It's okay.
Made of dry-laid, dressed stone, this basement is at least 90 years old. It has 2 rooms, which you entered via a stairway at the north end. The fencing you see is a piece of the old Ford security fence. Just north of the basement is a well, mostly filled in with leaves and branches now. But these weren't the only people here before the Fords. There's a lot of legends out here at Haven Hill. One of them says that Jimmy Hoff is buried out here. Whether he is or not, I don't know. But one thing I do know for sure, which is that he's not buried right here. This grave has been empty for a while now. In fact, we suspect about 90 years. Originally there was a farmhouse the other side of Livingston Road, and the people who lived there, one of their loved ones died, and they buried them right here. It's a beautiful spot. Then Edsel Ford came along and bought the property. The family exhumed the body, removed it to another location, and left the empty grave. We're surrounded on 3 sides by water, on the 4th side by the Haven Hill security fence. So no one ever came back here. And the grave was simply left. It's now been eroding in slowly for the last 90 years. In another 90 years, you'll never be able to see it.
Yep, you loosen that
The
one
first
up
time
and
I
it
left the
turns.
trail at Haven Hill, a friend and I nearly tripped over our first big find. Off in the woods, far from any road or trail, are the remains of 2 crudely built log cabins. We're standing inside the lower cabin right now, which is in far better shape than the upper cabin. As you can see, these were built by stacking up small logs, nailing them together with iron nails, and then using a white mortar in between the logs, inside and outside, to make them waterproof and windproof. It doesn't look terribly comfortable, and it probably wasn't, but it wasn't terrible either. The cabins each had a hinged door, and there's even a few traces of paint left on the window frame. Each cabin is about 12 feet by 8.5 feet and cut into the hillside. It'd be nice to have an exact date for these cabins, but that's hard to find. Everyone's heard of radiocarbon dating, but 100 years old is really just too new for that technique, or any other radioisotope dating method really, and it's also destructive. Maybe we could do a tree ring dating analysis for a few of the larger remaining logs here, but that's also destructive.
Tree ring analysis, we'd have to drill boreholes through it.
One of the things that's very important for both modern explorers and amateur archaeologists
Within that
to
range,
remember
that's
is
not going to
that
help much.
while we can look and, in the case of very durable things like stone, metal, or
the only
concrete,
thing
even
dateable,
touch, we do have to be very careful to
You
not
can
move
scrape
or
off some
damage
of the
anything.
paint, maybe do a chemical analysis on
Fortunately, for this site,
it. And that might
we
date it
actually
to
had
a
another
decade or
option.
two. The nails might date it to...
A lot of planes coming over, but I think we're also on the edge metro. Those are big planes.
This fence, which surrounds the cabins, is unique. We're all used to seeing wire fence today, but it used to be pretty rare in northern climates. It had a problem. Wire expands and contracts with temperature changes. So if you put up your wire fence in the winter, summer would come, the wire would expand and stretch, and the fence would sag. Your animals could step right over the top of it. If you put it up in the summer, on the other hand, it gets cold in the winter, the wire would contract, and it could contract so hard, in fact, that it would actually bust your fence posts. That all changed in 1879. That's the year that the Spring Steel Fence Company patented this fence, which they called the coiled woven fence. Instead of individual wires going straight for the full length of the fence, which were then woven together with the vertical wire, instead they used thinner wires,
Yeah, just
which were very loosely
hard
twisted
to get
together for
something.
the long horizontal runs.
Yeah, yours.
This allowed the wires to expand and contract just by tightening and loosening the twists, rather than changing the actual length of the wire. This eliminated the problem of thermal expansion and contraction, and made the wire fences usable in northern climates. All modern wire fence today is actually built on this same concept. Since we know that this fence was invented in 1879, and it was only available until about 1920, we know that the cabins were built sometime in that 41-year period, just before Edsel Ford bought the property. Just up Cedar Creek from Haven Hill Lake is the deer tree. Some friends and I found this one day not long ago when we came out looking for the bear tree. And although we didn't find the bear tree that day, we did actually find this instead. If you look closely, you can just make out what it says. Okay, this is a little hard to read, but here we go. November 22nd, 1922, the year before Edsel bought the property, we killed a deer here. This is, or rather was, the bear tree. Originally, it was carved much like the deer tree, maybe even by the same person. Unfortunately, unlike the deer tree, which is still alive, the bear tree isn't. And as a result, it's lost its bark and its message. Originally, it was carved with the message, "Bar Kilt Here," and a date, B-A-R-K-I-L-T, here. Unfortunately, since it's lost its bark, it's lost its message, and we've lost another piece of history. Technically, history means that we have a written record of the time period. Prehistoric, then, means that we have no written record. It doesn't mean that the people who lived in it were in any way primitive or barbaric. It simply means that we don't have a written record of those people at that time, at that place, yet. Someday we may have. Right now, I'm standing in a former channel of the Huron River. The Huron flows for about 130 miles, beginning in Indian Springs Metro Park, about 6.5 miles to the northeast of here, and ending in the northwest corner of Lake Erie. The Huron's navigable year-round. It stays open, it stays full of water. There's no major rapids, no major waterfalls. So it's the perfect navigation route. And before the arrival of the Europeans, this was a major interstate highway. We know that there was a settlement right here, in fact, right along this former channel. And we know that because on the rocks at my feet, up on the hillsides, we find holes, strange square holes, triangular holes, cross hatchings, things that could not have been formed by nature, but could have only been formed by the people who lived here before. Some marks on stones, like these ones, are obviously fresh. You can tell that they're fresh from the way that the patina, the natural weathering of the stone, has been rubbed off. This was probably done by animals fairly recently. Some marks in stones are suspicious, like this one. It's uncommon, but not impossible, for an inside angle like this one to occur naturally in a stone. And some, like this square hole cut in the stone, are very clearly man-made. Square stone holes, like this one, are relatively common along ancient Native American water routes. Although there's not complete agreement on how they were used, it's thought that pegs were placed in the holes, and these pegs were then used for moorings. And sometimes there's really just no question. This small stone, found at the site, is called a bearing block. It was carved to perfectly fit into the palm of your hand, where it was used as part of a bow drill for starting fires or drilling holes in wood, bone, or even other stones. Over time, rivers do move, and the Huron River, which once flowed here at my feet, now flows about 4 miles to the east of Haven Hill instead. The people who lived here, who made their living through trade with those traveling up and down the Huron, would have had to move on as well. When we think of Haven Hill, we mostly think about Edsel Ford and his family. But it's important to remember, they weren't the first ones to live here, not even close. The people who lived right here beat him by thousands of years. In 1943, Edsel Ford died. 3 years later, his wife Eleanor sold the Haven Hill estate to the state of Michigan, which combined it with land west of here to create the Highland State Recreation Area. The recreation area focuses on nature. However, by focusing on nature alone, much has been lost. We lost the lodge to fire, and much of the farm group too. While the gatehouse just barely survived the combination of neglect and the elements, the sheep barn didn't. The pool, fountain, and tennis court lie in ruins. Even ruins would be an improvement for the toboggan run, ski hills, and the extensive Jens Jensen landscaping. Unless you know what you're looking for, you'll be lucky to find them at all. Haven Hill was built in secrecy, and it managed to maintain that secrecy for decades. Today, though, thanks to the work of mostly amateur archaeologists, historians, and archivists, Haven Hill's past is being rediscovered and shared with the world. Volunteers are working to stabilize and partially restore many of the features here at Haven Hill. But there's still plenty more to explore.
Now they ran over glass and they ran over nails and they ran over pigs and puppy dog tails. They spotted a cop and they shot out a sight. They rambled all day and they rambled all night. They smashed up fences and telegraph poles. They bumped into ditches and deep shut holes. They bumped into a preacher and the preacher took a ride. And the Ford rambled on with Johnny and his bride. And the little old Ford, it rambled right along. And the little old Ford, it rambled right along. He swung around the corner and he bumped into a mule. And the darned old jackass kicked like a fool. He kicked and he kicked and he kicked the wheels. But he had to quit kicking to save his heels. When it runs out of dope, just fill it up with smoke and the little Ford will ramble right along. You can smash up the top and smash up the feet. You can twist it out of shape till both ends meet. Smash up the body and rip out a gear. Smash up the front and smash up the rear. Smash up the fender and rip off the tires. Smash up the lamps and cut out the wires. Throw in the clutch and then forget the juice. And the little old Ford will go to beat the deuce. And the little old Ford, it rambled right along. And the little old Ford, it rambled right along. Now, cut that out.
This is how it starts. Without traffic, the weeds start to come up between the cracks. They die and, combined with leaves falling on top of the road surface, new soil starts to form. Then new plants take root in that. Before long, in as little as a decade or two, if the climate's right, the road is gone. You'd probably think that nature, which seems intent on destroying everything that we've ever made, would be the obvious enemy of archaeology. And I suppose to an extent that's true. But at the same time, I've always been really interested in studying how nature interacts with the things that we've left behind. 5 or 6 years ago, when we first discovered the covered bridge, not only could you still make out the deck boards of the bridge, you could actually still make out the tree that fell across the middle of it. Today, the tree and the deck boards have finished their decomposition into soil. Dirt washing down the hillside, combined with leaves falling onto the pool deck since the maintenance stopped here around 1980, have created enough soil for plants and even small trees to take root here. Efforts to reclaim both the pool and tennis court from nature began about a week ago, but there's a lot of work left ahead of us. Here at the lodge, we get to watch while nature reclaims its own. It can be a little depressing at first, but if you look below the surface, you can see that this is actually completely full of life. After the fire, what was left was mostly partially charred wood, copper and iron pipe, appliances. These were all collapsed in to the basement, and then that was topped with dirt. In amongst the ruins were lots of air spaces, big and small. There was still plenty of strength left in some of these logs and pipes to support the dirt and debris that was piled above them. Soon, as rainfall washed some of the surface dirt down, opening up passages between these voids, they actually became the first animal dens. If you come up here alone, walking quietly, it's pretty common to see a groundhog ducking into one of these holes along the foundation. There was even a fox den right by the front door last year. Snakes, deer, and other wildlife are often seen here as well. It takes about 50 years for a site like this to be fully reclaimed by nature once it's been abandoned by humans, and we're only about a third of the way there today. But still, it's obvious that nature has already staked out its claim. Wildlife have returned here, and the underground habitat is almost back to normal. And although the grass is being cut and the verandas here are being swept clean, still, nature definitely seems to be making headway. In the end, nature always wins.
Now Henry Jones and a pretty little queen took a ride one day in a swing limousine. The car kicked up and the engine wouldn't crank. There wasn't any gas in the gasoline tank.
I guess the question is, why is Haven Hill still a special place, and why should we try to revive it? Edsel and Eleanor Ford are greatly overlooked in any discussions with the Fords or history or Greenfield Village or any of the above. Edsel and Eleanor donated over $600,000 worth of artwork valued in their time to the DIA. They kept the DIA going during the Depression, paying all the salaries, all the utilities, all the upkeep. And in along with doing this, of course, they could afford to do it. They did a lot of other giving too. And this was their place to come and relax. And I think it gets overlooked a lot when it comes to the big picture. There is many facets to this place.
The thing that makes Highland Recreation and Haven Hill special to me is the history behind it. Really excited about being able to preserve that history.
But I'm standing in front of the gatehouse, the original point that you would come into the facility. But it was an opportunity for those of historic importance to come to this location because of their contacts with Edsel and Eleanor Ford as part of the automotive heritage history that we intend to share here at the park. People like Thomas Edison, Admiral Byrd, Mr. Burroughs, who wrote the Tarzan books, were all visitors here. And they all had to come through the security check gatehouse as you pass through behind me, as we do today. There is a bicycle path that comes through. So those that ride or walk on that trail will be walking into history as they come across the front end of Highland State Recreation Area.
It's a place for adventure and excitement. There's so much to do. There's hiking, there's looking at the ruins, there's swimming at the lake, there's just to putting yourself in the Ford family's position of owning a piece of property on such a beautiful place brings a nostalgic feel back.
The barn was large. It had a great architectural aspect to it. It's a double monitor. It's got large window sets that use natural light to light the interior of the barn. And it was used in support of the operation here at Haven Hill as an operating farm. But along with it came the entertainment aspect of Haven Hill, inviting friends, and those contacts across the automotive world or the art world were surely present to come out here. We initially came together in October 2007 with about 65 people to look over, repair, clean up vines, and assess the building at the time. It did have a small hole on the first floor, southwest corner of the roof. The roof really should have been probably replaced in the 80s, but that would have been at least a $15,000 expense and a very large amount of shingles. Well, unfortunately, a natural occurrence happened on June 8th, 2008. That's when a large wind of about 74 miles an hour, as we looked at the National Weather's spot map for that day, and it actually blew down the west wall of the barn on the first floor. The second and third floor tumbled, and 165 feet of this historic barn laid in rubble.
When I was in school, I saw a picture of Henry Ford and Thomas Edison sitting together, and they were good friends. And they were sitting on a stone porch in front of an old log cabin somewhere on top of a hill. And the point of the picture is in a history book. It's just that they were friends. I didn't think anything of it. This was years and years ago, obviously. But then when I started working here at Haven Hill, and I came across the ruins of the lodge and knew that it was Edsel Ford's place, I immediately recognized the location. And it was the north veranda that Henry and Thomas were sitting on.
What we intend to share in the future, and as we have, is the opportunity to stand where Thomas Edison stood, to walk where Burroughs walked relative to his thinking maybe on Tarzan books. The opportunity to relive the heritage of the automotive early days in the 20s, 30s, and 40s that would have occurred here. So it's an opportunity to come back in history.
There is many facets to this place. A long time ago, I knew I'd have a barn in my future, somehow, some way. And it's mentioned in our movie a little bit that we've made. And this must be it, because I've been out here since '07, and I'm going to keep doing this until I can't do it anymore. So this building and the other buildings that we're trying to save here are well worth my time and everybody else's time and their donations to become involved in and let it become part of the big picture.
So Throughout the whole film, I've really been focusing on the archaeology at Haven Hill and the history here at Haven Hill, and kind of skipping by the natural aspect here. But Haven Hill is really an incredible natural resource too. In fact, it's so special that in 1976, the National Park Service recognized the Haven Hill Natural Area, which is about the northern half of the Haven Hill estate, as a national natural landmark. And that's really a very special designation for Haven Hill, and it indicates just how special of a place this really is.
Well, it is the first place that I started hiking in Michigan back in 2006, and it's a beautiful park, beautiful trails. You meet a lot of new people out here. And the one thing I really remember about Haven Hill, and I didn't realize that this is where we went as a kid, is Teeple Lake. And my mom would bring me and my brothers out to Teeple Lake almost every weekend. And that lake looked huge. It doesn't look so huge anymore, but it's a wonderful place just because it has good memories.
This is where my father brought me hiking. I've brought my kids hiking. I'm sure my kids will bring their kids hiking.
Now Henry Jones and a pretty little queen took a ride one day in a big limousine. The car kicked up and the engine wouldn't crank. There wasn't any gas in the gasoline tank.
The future in this place, that's everyone's question now. Before it was, are you still tearing the barn down? Where's the gatehouse? We can't see it due to growth, and what happened to the lodge? Well, now we have 3 buildings with 3 roofs that don't leak, and that's huge because the barn behind us can be multi-purpose.
And the question is, what can you use this space for? We've gone over several suggestions, and there's more than 20 opportunities that we see a viable opportunity here at the Edsel Ford Sheep Barn. Minimum would be a tractor show, maybe a flea market, and long term there's an opportunity if we can maybe extend the pad with seating or temporary seating to have events like barbecue and bluegrass. What an opportunity to enjoy the opportunity of square dancing, entertainment. Minimally, we might be able to paint the south wall that's behind me on the barn to a light color, white perhaps, or cream, and show movies or video or entertainment activities for those campers that use the park.
We can have craft shows, antique fairs. We had our first one this spring, turned out very well. Next year we hope to get vendors here. Barn dances, Halloween parties. We've had 3 offers to have weddings performed in the barn.
And as far as for the future, I'm a member of the Highland Trail Riders Association as well as Friends of Highland Recreation, and our staging area is adjacent to the barn, and we have all kinds of plans for when it's finished to be able to use that barn as part of our events that we have here 3 times a year in the park.
And we may rebuild the entire structure, but we would do it this time without the columns and beams down through the center of the concrete pad, so that it could be a large span to allow wedding receptions, square dance opportunities, other unobstructed shows and entertainment venues for those groups that might be able to come in. But it's an opportunity that could become even Native American powwows. We're not quite sure all the aspects that we might do, but it's really fun to come out in the wintertime and have snowshoeing activities and sledding, tobogganing activities here in the park. But what an opportunity it would be to have an ice skating rink, and we would flood the current concrete pad and make that available to the visitors of the park at all. But just imagine this entire area being used as a winterfest with ice sculptures being cut by those competitors trying to develop a specific theme for the year.
We also want to be able to use the new trail to go up to the gatehouse on horseback and have some events up there as well.
In recent years, we have basically improved the condition of the garage portion of the gatehouse complex and actually have plastered the inside where there used to be a roll-up door. We hope to have the opportunity to have opening doors onto a plaza so that we use that building as an art gallery area, maybe for art instruction, and as a receiving area for an opportunity to share the heritage of Haven Hill. We see that our conversation ring is an opportunity to reflect on Jens Jensen, who is a noted landscape architect from Norway that is recognized as the Dean of Landscape Architecture. Jens Jensen also laid out the landscape areas at the Ford House and Grosse Pointe Shores, as well as at Fairlane for Henry and Claire Ford. Well, he did that same thing here at Haven Hill. We're trying to reproduce that activity and also have the opportunity to share a conversation ring that can do multiple things perhaps. One of those might be to be a art display area. Another one could be an avenue for photographic picture taking.
So I mentioned in the film that my favorite artifact of all of Haven Hill is actually the well pump down at the bottom of Haven Hill, and definitely still is. But if there's one artifact that I'd really like to see, and I don't know if it exists, and if it does, I don't know who has it, it's a logbook from the gatehouse. Just imagine if we could tell not only exactly who came in, but when people came in, when they left, and then correlate those dates with what else happened in their lives. Would we find that Admiral Byrd, for example, was at Haven Hill for a weekend, and then on Monday morning it was announced that Eleanor Ford was funding his expedition to the South Pole? Entirely possible. We know Admiral Byrd spent time out here. We know that Eleanor Ford funded his expedition to the South Pole. Do we know that it was discussed here? Yeah, there's a pretty good chance of it, really. It could have been discussed here, could have been discussed elsewhere. But there's all sorts of things, all of the different people that came out here. What happened here? That logbook would possibly tell us that. Hopefully, it'll turn up someday, if it exists. We don't know if it exists, but you never know.
When finished, we see it as a welcome center, an opportunity to welcome people involved. If their visit to the day in the park would be an opportunity to understand the history and heritage of the Edsel and Eleanor Ford activity that was here as Haven Hill.
Well, there's just one really thing that I'd like to see for the future. I would love to see this lodge, this entire thing restored to its natural grandeur as close as possible. Have tours come through, let the public know what it's like, so they can experience what it must have been like to be in the Ford family. I can't imagine having a place like this that was mine, that could come for vacations and weekends, and I would just love to see this all back as close to possible as the way it was.
My dreams for Haven Hill for the future would include a restoration of as much of the property as possible. Like up here at the mansion, there's 7 fireplaces in this place. If this could be rebuilt and tours gone through, it would provide countless hours of entertainment for countless generations.
Up on the hill, we'd love to see the extreme right side be artist in residence and the old car area become a small museum. We need to get electricity back up there.
The carriage house, I think, probably actually has the most potential, though. Once that big central area is opened up, that's actually going to be a great interior space for meetings, for conferences, for all sorts of things up there on top of the hill. The whole park, though, really, some of the underground spaces that right now some of them are accessible, but we really don't want people in them because it's kind of dangerous. Some are completely inaccessible. Those are incredible spaces, and we really want to get those opened up to the public. We want to show off some of the features that we have here and open things up and get more people out here exploring around the park and learning about Edsel, learning about nature, learning about how nature and history and archaeology interact. There's so much out here just waiting to be done.
Anything that works, anything that fits in with the Department of Natural Resources, such as their trail, which now passes right directly through the portal you used to enter to come to visit Edsel and Eleanor. We're pretty much a go for any of that kind of stuff.